Kristin, Peter, thank you so much for taking the time this morning for sharing your knowledge around this hot, controversial topic. Is it okay to fire a customer? Thanks a lot. I will start with quite an easy one, an easy question. I will ask you to introduce yourself quickly so that we get to know a bit more about yourself. Kat, do you want to start?
Sure, I'll start. I'm Kat Fisher. I'm Senior CSM at Signifyd. So originally I started my career in the music industry, so spent 5 years there before moving into tech, where I worked at a company called Disciple. We were building mobile applications for music artists, and then pivoted to SaaS, where I built the CS org from scratch. So I was head of CS there and moved to Signifyd, who are fraud prevention software, working with big merchants. So I've been with them for 4 months now. So that's my background.
Thank you, Kat. Kristin, do you want to continue?
Hi, everyone. I'm Kristin. I'm a Canadian transplanted to London. Everyone always asks, because as soon as you hear my accent, you obviously know I am not British, but I'm also not American. So I have been in customer success leadership roles for about 8 years. I started my career in market research and customer experience research, and similar to Kat, my company pivoted to enterprise SaaS, and I was suddenly in customer success and have found that I really enjoyed it. And I'm actually working on founding my own company right now. So that has been very challenging and very exciting. So I'm excited to talk to you about this topic.
Good, that's exciting. Peter, tell us more about yourself.
Yeah, hi everyone, name's Peter. I'm one of the co-founders of the Customer Succcess Network and one of the co-founders of the Customer Conference. So there's a plug again. But in my spare time, I have a full-time job, and that's the VP of Global Customer Success for Poppulo, where we were up until last week an Irish-American company. Now we're Vista Equity Partner owned company. We were acquired last week and merged with another company. This is my 4th iteration as a VP of CS, scaling a company for growth or for acquisition. I love this topic. Is it okay to fire a customer? Because when I first put it out on LinkedIn, my VP of marketing came storming into my office and said, "You can't say that. You can't say that." And I says, "Well, no, the whole point of this is that it's clickbait. No, but you can't say it." So I had to actually tone it down a bit. But anyway, I'll try to contain myself during this session.
Thank you so much, Peter. So you've created a nice transition for my first question. So why do you think your VP of marketing said that, and why is it are we so afraid asking this question?
I think there are lots of different reasons, right? First of all is that firing a customer is at a complete odds to what everyone actually thinks. Now, the whole point of this is that really is to, how do you prevent yourself from being in a position to even contemplate firing a customer, I guess is probably the most important way. And I think that it's just one of those topics that people tend to shy away from. And it's all the usual reasons, right? Is because if you fire a customer, if you purposefully terminate a contract with a customer, then you lose revenue. So straight away, you're now at odds with your CRO and with your CFO. So if you terminate the customer for 100 grand, in order to make up that difference in your sales, your overall revenue numbers, you're going to have to get 200 grand in extra revenue, which means the sales, if your VP of sales is not going to be very grateful. And that's just a very, very simple example. So I think you've also got cultural matters, you've got institutional matters, you've got the stage of growth where that company is. So there are lots of different factors ranging from cultural to financial through to just preventing it from happening in the first place, which I know we'll touch on later on. And that is, for me, the key essence. How do I prevent the bad fit in the first place? And at what stage do I tackle that?
Good. Kat, anything you would like to add on the reason why it's a bit difficult to address this topic?
Sure. I think it probably comes from our sort of intrinsic mindset that customer is always right. You know, we've heard that years and years, and that's just a kind of a something that we all used to, but actually that's not correct. And it's okay to challenge the customer. They're not always right. Sometimes they're not doing the best things in their interest. So I think you need to challenge that mindset and shift away from it. It's just what's best for the customer, what's best for your company. On the revenue point to Peter, I think obviously when you lose a 100K customer, that's kind of a one equation. You know, if we look at the kind of lower ACVs, you also need to look at the resource, kind of protecting your resource and the time that they spend, your team spends on a particular customer who is not achieving the outcome, who's not probably bringing the revenue. You know, you need to think about that in that sense as well, in terms of, okay, the ACV is that, but how much actually time you're spending on this customer does this equate? So I would add to that. And finally, again, talking about kind of from experience coming from the smaller startup, you know, when you're growing, you're so I would say desperate to bring every sale, keep every sale, sign everyone, you know, to get that ARR ramping up. And it's the pressure to retain the customers is quite high. So particularly in the early stage startups, I think it's a quite a challenge to say, okay, this is not right, this is not working for them or us. The ROI on our resources is not adding up. We should do something about it.
Mm-hmm. And so it's true, it's super true in early stage startup when every customer is key. But Kristin, you when we talked about it, you said sometimes you're not a CSM or you don't run a team in a hyper growth startup. So there is also this risk.
Yeah, I was actually just recently talking to the chief commercial officer of another business, and I was telling him I was going to be on this panel. And his comment was, oh, I would love to fire one of my customers, but it's, I think, 60, 75% of their revenue. And so they can't. It's one of those customers where they have these extremely large partnership. There's only about a dozen of them. And it's sort of the customer who's made the company. And so I think we have to acknowledge the fact that you can't always fire customers, as much as I bet you that every one of us is sort of thinking in our heads right now, oh, there's one that I'd really like to go right now. And then the other thing is that I've been, so there's that side of things, but I've been in businesses that we're not in scale up mode anymore. We're sort of in, you know, we're an established tech company and we're fighting, as Kat said, for every single sale again. And, you know, our sales numbers maybe aren't going the direction that we would like. And so it's not really an option for the customer success team to be firing customers. I think that if you just ask me the blanket question, can you fire customers? Yes, you can, but there's so many situations that we're in as customer success managers where you really can't. And so we have to figure out ways to get them to a place where we're not having to fire them, as Peter said, figure out how we can identify issues before they get to a place where we need to sort of break up with them.
Good. So it's true that it's key to the purpose of this is also to prevent it from happening. And before digging into there are not so many customers and how to avoid it, how to prevent it. If we are in a situation when we have to sometimes take a tough decision, what are the benefits? What are the benefits of sometimes taking this decision? Peter, do you have examples saying, yeah, we have to address it?
Yeah, well, I think just again building on everyone else's point so far is that when we think about it, you know, you have to go back to the very, very start. I think, which is you know, a bad fit customers. Look, we know in CS we're always going to get a degree of overpromise from our sales colleagues, and we accept that, and we have to accept that to a large extent, part of our role is to go in and, where appropriately, is to reset expectations. Now, you hope that's not on a very wide spectrum, but it is going to happen, right? And you've also got customers that don't listen. I mean, let's be absolutely clear here, that do not listen to the salespeople. They just, okay, right, I'm sure we can figure that out later, all that kind of stuff. And then we find out that when we go in and we do the onboarding, that particular workflow or use case that we think is trivial, right? But it isn't, because again, I think one of the other I guess lenses that we have to, that I think we all fail in, is that we assume all our customers all use our product easily. Like, of course, our workflow is so good that every business that's completely different is going to have the same workflow by and large. So my point there is that it's about validating the customer requirements again during the onboarding. Now, particularly if it's a system that requires a degree of customization or configuration. If it's completely out of the box, then there's a bit of a problem there. But it is about validating those requirements. I think even when they slip through that particular net, during the renewal process, that's another excellent time to reset those expectations. And the final thing is to, going back to Kristin's point, because I've been in startups where, one customer supplied 90% of the revenue and the entire development team was working for that customer, right? I mean, it was completely pointless. So, but I think what you do is you then have to, I think, put these into boxes and say, right, what we're doing for XYZ Corp is not normal. So we accept as a business that our strategy is to do this for this customer until a particular point, right? And if there's clarity with CS, then we know that we're not just hitting our head against a brick wall the whole time. So clarity of purpose, this is why we're doing it. But then you've also got to have the conversation with the customer that says, do you know that we're doing all of this for you, but we're not doing it for anyone else? So I think at that stage, the business has to have a strong look at itself and say, are we in a COTS, platform, or are we in professional services? So I think there's wider conversations that have to happen. Now, they're difficult to kick off because everyone's busy, right? Mm-hmm. Oh, here comes those CS people again telling us that we need to change our business model. But no, because I know one of the things we're going to talk about is that how do we get ahead of the game here? How do we more forward integrate into the sales process? But again, it's getting those key learnings and making sure that we're collecting analysis and everything else about those bad fit customers, because we think that everyone else knows about them, but they probably don't, right? And engineering don't want to know because they're too busy being hit in the head for the next new feature that's going to catapult the company into the next revenue zone, right? So, I think it's up to us. We've got to really work hard at capturing all and explaining what's actually going on to engineering and to sales.
I have a couple of points actually to add to that, if I may, just a couple of tips. In the early stage when, we were fighting for every customer, as soon as you hear the word workaround or let's hack it, that's a warning, isn't it right? And the other point is when I saw that we were, focusing too much on one customer, trying to customize and push developers kind of out, pushback was, okay, this is the agency model. We're not doing the agency model. We're building a SaaS business, and kind of trying to refocus the leadership on with that sort of that philosophy, if that helps. Here's a couple of tips.
And Kat, thinking about, sometimes we are so into, yes, we are gonna help this customer, it's the first one, or we can't afford to lose them. Could you just remind us, let's take a step back and think about what we want to protect as well, and the cost that are related to keeping this customer.
Sure. In terms of protecting the internal team, yes. So again, when we're dealing with a bad fit customer, disruptive customer, this is bad for team morale, and you have to think about it. People have to enjoy what they do. They need to love the job because we spend a lot of time in our working day, doing our job, and we have to enjoy it. And if that kind of element and joy goes away, that becomes very challenging, and the productivity goes down, the overall morale, and kind of starts creeping into the company and the company's culture. So I'd say always think about protecting your team, because ultimately some customers will come and go, but you do want to build the best team for your company and motivate everyone to do their best job. So protecting the morale, and again, protecting the ROI. How many times you had to regroup with the senior leadership for 2 hours to discuss a fairly small client? We're like, this is a lot of time being spent right now today on this particular customer, so you need to think about the ROI on CS in that sense as well. I mean, it's more common with the smaller ACVs, like I said at the beginning. When you have an enterprise 100Ks, that's a different ball game. But think about the overall cost that is being spent on a particular customer in question, who's probably not happy. Is it worth it? Is it worth it for them, or is it worth it for you and your team?
Good. Kristin, anything you want to add on maybe the benefits of sometimes taking this tough decision?
Yeah, I think it's just important to remember that customer success managers, most of them have a book of business that has multiple clients in it. And if they are spending 90% of their time on one customer, and I often feel like some of the most demanding customers aren't the ones that are paying the most in terms of ACV or AR, depending on how you track. Is that a good use of your CSM's time, or your CSM or your entire customer success org too? Look at how many support tickets you get, look how much training these people are asking for on a regular basis, and understand the cost versus benefit ratio. And I think that we'll talk about this, but you've got to be aligned throughout the entire organization if a customer needs to go.
I think just sorry, Alex, a point just to make, which because this is something that we implemented recently at Poppulo, which I plagiarized openly from somebody else. So and I did recognize this company. I can't say who it was because they shared it with me in confidence. And it was to do with the feedback loop for feature requests. And I think this goes some way to it, right? Is that, there's a couple of features in our product which do drive our customers insane. Now we're just like any other company. We look at the NPS scores, right, and the comments, and you got half the cohort say this is the easiest product in the world I've ever used, and then the other half say this is the worst product ever, I can't use it, right? So standard kind of feedback that we all got. But I think we did this recently where we approached some customers that were not in the high ARR category, right? But they were very high in the time needed to explain to them why we weren't going to address a particular feature. So in the end, we just took the decision, we're just going to say no. So we went back and we said to a few customers, we're not going to do that feature. We're probably never, ever, ever going to do that feature ever again. Because it just kept on coming up. So we said, from now on, we'll go to product manager, we'll meet with engineering, we'll create that pod between CS, engineering, and product. If we take a decision that we're not going to do the feature, which does drive the bad fit, right? Then we'll go back to the customer and say, we have no plans, at least for the next 6 to 12 months, to do that feature. Now, it doesn't happen that often, but it's enough. Just basically, you're calling the customer's bluff, right? Because what are we all afraid of? The customer churning, right? So I would rather know that the customer is going to churn now than just have it hanging over my head for the next year. So that's something that we've implemented in the past 6 months. Ironically, since we've implemented it, we've found that engineering are more receptive to actually doing some more work for us, but that's a different matter, I think. So I think addressing the issues, the key issues, as soon as possible, and having clarity of communication to the customer, I think can go a long way to helping diffuse the emotions and everything else that some customers have.
True. Really about keeping a very frank and honest and adult conversation with the customers and not being afraid of telling them the truth from day one and resetting expectation. This is our partnership is going to look like that.
Absolutely, but it's also making sure that your CSMs do not kick the can, right? Because that's what they. Oh well, I'll go back to product and we'll put it on the feature list. What the customer hears, that's going to be released next quarter. Now that's not what you said, but that's what they hear.
Good. And so we've talked about firing customers. So you have a long experience, but could you share with us, does it happen often? Just to make sure that we are to have a view. Kat.
Sure. Well, I think it's very important to call out that firing the customer does not happen very often. It's a very rare occasion. Typically, they will leave on their own. And, obviously, we're talking about churn. Firing the customer is very rare. So in terms of the real life examples, kind of at the small startup, this was a case of a quite disruptive customer. Their expectations were way too high in terms of what the capability of the platform was, and specifically what the CSM role would be. That person thought that there would be, their personal, almost, assistant in the way, like daily calls, daily task, everything. And the ARR on that customer was, teeny tiny. But we were in the spirit of making all the customers successful and just kind of assessing, okay, can we go through the pain barrier here for, 4 weeks, educate the customer and see where it goes. And it just didn't happen. It got worse. And the customer was quite disruptive and abusive as well, which is, very sad to see. So we had to pull the plug and say, I'm sorry, we're not doing the business with you anymore. And it was a bit of a shock to the customer. And that was a whole alignment within the company, that our COO and CEO, everyone knew that was happening. And they said, absolutely, pull the plug. And that's what we did. So that is kind of a kind of extreme example where there is a kind of a very disruptive, rude customer, and that was sad to see. At Signifyd, where I am right now, I've been there for 4 months. I haven't had any cases of that, but I do know that it can happen. And it's an interesting one because for us, because we are a liability shift for fraud for retailers, we essentially provide decisions on the orders. And if we get it right, if we get it wrong, we will pay out on those revenues. And it very, very rarely can happen that we are under the water, essentially, and we're losing money with a particular customer. And we'll be just honest, look, for some reason it doesn't work. We can't help you here. You need to do something else. You need to do some really drastic measures, but we're not going to kind of cover your losses because it just doesn't work. And that is an easy one to solve because, when the money is leaking out and the customer is not getting his problem solved, that means the solution isn't right for them. And that's more amicable departure.
Yeah, makes sense. And it's a business decision in that sense. There's alignment internally. So pretty, it's rare. And Kristin, do you want to add anything on that? How many customers did you have to fire?
So I can only think of 2 situations in 8 years. Sean just put a comment in the chat about is this an emotional decision? And it 100% is not, especially given how many people need to be involved in the decision. This isn't a situation of like, oh, I really don't like my customer, they're making a lot of work for me. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about customers who are unable to get the value out of the platform that you are selling in a way that many other customers can. So as much as we talk about this, I think that the real point of having the conversations, as both Kat and Peter have said, it's about preventing it in the first place from it happening at all.
Good. And Peter, do you want to add anything on, is it Does it happen often, or is it rare? And maybe it's really about, and we'll dig deeper into how do you prevent that.
Oh, knocking over my microphone. There's one very, very quick example. There's a longer version, but I'm not going to give you the longer version. But let's say 65,000 lines of custom code that a customer had was built up over 7 years in the old on-prem game. And they were on an soon-to-be unsupported Microsoft platform. The company I worked for at the time, since we had built this custom Vehemoth, now had COTS software. The customer wanted to have all of the code replaced to support the next version of Windows Server. You're talking millions. So so this little story is about making difficult decisions, and to Kristin's point, internally, never mind externally. So the upgrade I was in the sales pipeline for 2 million, right? Now the company turnover at the time was about 70, so 2 million from one customer was a pretty big slice of the annual sales pipeline, and upgrades were considered pipeline, right? That's a different matter. So I went down to the customer and I said, I am not going to quote you on this. We're just not going to do it, because in a few years' time we'll be back here again, and plus you're not going to give us 2 million quid, so I'm not going to quote you for it. So I went back and I told the VP of sales, we're not going to do that. So the problem there was, I knew I was making the right decision for that customer. They needed to move to a COTS, the standard, product that could easily do it, and move away from heavy custom code that cost an absolute fortune. But it wiped 2 million quid off the sales pipeline. I wasn't a very popular person. The customer didn't even like me. In fact, nobody liked me for a while. But my point there is that it's about making difficult decisions. You don't have to fire the customer, but you could fire the concept that they're currently following. So you could sit down and say, you're just doing this the wrong way. This is just wrong, right? And we're going this way, but you want to go this way. Now, we can get our VP of product in and show you why we're going this way. Now, we're not saying that we're always right, but what we're saying is that that's where we're going. So at some stage, we're going to have a difficult parting here, right? I mean, we've all been there where we know the customer is going to churn eventually, even though we're going to throw loads of stuff at them. So I think where you can and where you have strong internal relationships, right, and the backing of senior people, then you can have those difficult conversations.
This is a great, so it's a great example, Peter, and I can totally resonate with that. Firing the concept, and well done for your courage to do that. Just to knowing that you need to challenge the customer towards the scale is a scalable solution essentially, and more efficient solution, and that education piece can be hard. So yes, I had similar scenarios in the past as well.
And Peter, you mentioned the different things around setting customers' expectation. Sometimes when there is a renewal, maybe taking this opportunity to reset the expectation and alignment in terms of what we're going to achieve with the customer. Did you have, because if we're thinking about bad fit customers versus good fit customers, do you have any criteria to select and to in order to prevent bad fit customers, to define what is a bad fit, what is a good fit in the customer lifecycle?
I don't know if I have any framework, because I know somebody mentioned the ICPs, the ideal customer profile. Now, I'm really nervous about ICPs because they're invented by marketing people a lot of the time, and salespeople. How many customer success functions come up with the company's ICP? Right? We don't, right? That's not what we do. We get given the ideal customer, right? So I think you have to use your whatever customer health score systems and methodologies that you currently use, because there's going to be a lot of diversity in there. So if a customer is red, it doesn't mean it's a bad fit. If you have a standard RAG system, right, because it could be lost sponsor or anything else, So I think you have to, at some stage, look at the workflow, the rationale and the reasoning behind why that customer needs that workflow so bad and why we don't have it. I think that's probably the one area that's my first go-to place. And that's asking them, why do you need that? And you might find out that it's Bob in accounts in that customer who's saying that they need this, whereas everyone else doesn't, right? So you do get those extremes. But I would just look at, why do you need that? Understand why the customer has to have that particular intended outcome and why we don't have it as a company. I think that's the question. But I think we get so sucked into the weeds that we forget to come up sometimes and ask those top level questions. Why?
And if we look at the patterns between bad fit customers versus good fit customers, Kat, do you think it's possible to be able to flag those bad fit and how to prevent and how to change relationship?
Sure. So with the bad fit customers at Disciple, the smaller startup, we've through the time we started picking up some signals in terms of what then becomes what becomes criteria for the bad fit. We even kind of had so what started as a joke, but then kind of continued a kind of a churn Charlie profile. We didn't have any customers named Charlie, it's just rhymed really well. So we knew there were certain parameters that we would spot, in terms of their size, their use case, how they interact with us, sometimes even how they describe certain features, how they talk about certain features. We're like, oh, that sounds like a, churn Charlie to us. And I know it was a kind of a bit of a company joke, but actually it helped us to spot those early signs of a bad fit customers that already been onboarded. And then we would feed back that comments back to sales saying, this is what we see in onboarding and post-implementation and further down the line. So those are the signs that you guys can pick up early on. So we built this profile, and that was really, really helpful for us. I'm going to defend the ICP, Peter, and I'll tell you why. Again, we did a really good job at Disciple. We had a head of growth, Pavel, who brought the concept into the company and built essentially 5 personas based on their, not just their use cases, but verticals, the size, sort of what they were trying to achieve. If you think of the product, it's building community apps. So, think yoga teacher building their own app and posting videos, or a charity creating an app, or musicians and so on. So we had all these kind of personas that we were able to identify. And when the new deal was coming in, we were like, okay, this is persona number 3, right? And the interesting thing that happened after is that we started to learn what works for those personas. So when the new, yoga teacher comes in, we say, hey, so-and-so does this, you might think about this. So we were, that knowledge was really valuable. We were telling them, you might price your product like that, you might sell your videos like that. And so we took the knowledge from other customers and transfer it to that persona. And because we had that really clear model for that, it was just very easy to follow, essentially.
So it's not only some criteria or early warnings to flag some bad fit customers, and for good fit customers, how to keep, to give some benchmark on good use cases.
Exactly. Everyone wanted to know, and like how, and I'm sure it's even in the bigger companies, at Signifyd as well. If a beauty brand comes to us, they would say, oh, how do we compare to other beauty brands in terms of, traffic or fraud pressure and that sort of thing. And they really value those insights. So you're right, Peter, it does come from marketing, but I think it's a good stuff that you can do with it. And more importantly, if you do have ICPs within your organization, don't leave it just with marketing. Make sure there's a feedback loop, okay, from CS to correct those ICPs, okay? You brought the ICP and then CS go back and say, okay, this is actually how it looks like in the reality, and then it becomes really useful.
That's a fair point. No, that's a fair shout. No, I would go along with that. And I think that I'm going to do a unashamed plug, but I was talking to Rick Adams last week. He's going to do a masterclass at the customer conference in June on storytelling and listening, which I think speaks to some extent to what you just said there, which is that to be able to tell great stories of how other customers, peers to that customer, have succeeded, but also to listen to what the customer says so that you can relate the right story.
And Kristin, I'm not going to ask you to decide between pro or cons ICP between Peter and Kat, but do you want to add anything on any early warnings, any processes we can put in place just to track bad fit and to prevent that?
Yeah, so we didn't call them ICPs, but personas that we sold to, and I would agree with Peter that they sometimes were more ideal than reality. But I really like how, Kat, you talk about the fact that you looked at them and you fed back to them and even added to them about how you could basically advise a customer around that. But I think that the things I would say is that your sales team, the organization needs to make sure that your sales team is incented to do the right thing. So they need to, it can't just be one and done in terms of a sale. Ideally, they need to have a stake in whether the customer is going to be an immediate churn risk, or whether the customer is going to renew. And so, figuring out with the leadership of the company how you can do that in a way that is realistic for you, for your organization, I think is really important. And then just having a really robust at-risk process is key. You looking at the customer journey involving not just the customer success side of the customer journey, everybody in the whole organization. When the customer is getting various different things, what types of milestones they should be hitting at different parts. And if they're not hitting it, you need to get them into that at-risk process. There's nothing worse than having a situation where you go back and you talk a little bit more with various different parts of the organization when a customer is churned, and there were several points that the customer should have gone into the at-risk process so that you can be mitigating some of the issues that are coming up. So making sure that you're realistic about some of the challenges that can be faced during onboarding and training, and ensuring that the customers are getting ongoing value.
Good. Some alignment with the sales and probably collaboration of feedback from what happened with existing customers makes sense. My last question, and then we're going to move to Slido. The questions in Slido is, so what does bad fit customers teach us? What do we learn from this? I want to start. Peter, do you want to start?
I think a few things. Bad fit customers can expose some of the weaknesses in how you manage escalation of support, how you manage the escalation of feature requests, how you deal with how disconnected you are with your pre-sales process, how poor your onboarding process may be, how robust your onboarding process is, how challenging your onboarding process is. It's all of those things. Like, my philosophy is that customer success is a management practice. It's no different than manufacturing widgets. There is a way by which you do customer success, and it's people, process, and systems, and it's continual optimization of each of those three pillars. So, and that's just down to anything from how robust is our RAG status, how subjective is it, How do we empower our CSMs? You know, so it can be as deep as you want it to be without giving you a very, very elusive answer. But I do think that if you're constantly like at Poppulo, we enjoy, you know, retention into the mid-90s, right? So we don't have a churn problem. And I think some of the times that in CS that we always think that churn is yes, look, we can't get away from churn as a measurement, but it's always about trying to understand where your problem is. So maybe the thing that we need to learn about bad fit customers is that we have a problem somewhere, and it's identifying in a calm and cool and non-judgmental way where those problems are.
But doing the root cause analysis for every situation. Kat, anything you'd like to add?
Sure. I think every bad fit customer probably crystallizes your focus and sends you in a bit of a soul searching. What is your product purpose? You know, you need to kind of revalidate what is your ideal customer, or what is the outcome they're trying to achieve, and what is the value around the product. So every bad fit customer, I think, triggers those questions again, and realignment on those, I think. And secondly, I think it just inevitably does lead to a better collaboration with sales, you know, because once you have too many bad fit customers, you got to go and do something about it and align with sales better and enable them to qualify better. Also enable them to fire the prospect and qualify out the prospect, which is kind of a similar, I guess, topic for the sales professionals as we are discussing here. When is it okay to, you know, kind of disqualify out if it's kind of on the edge? And what I'd say here is, you know, I've had example when the deal was on the edge, and we would bring customer success and say, well, myself and other CSMs, is this good? You know, would you guys take it, essentially? And it kind of leads to that collaboration. So that would be my key takeaways. Kind of crystallizing your product and your value, and better collaboration with sales is just, I think it's inevitable.
Good. Kristin, the learnings?
I love how Peter made the comment about you're not firing the customer, you're firing that situation. And I think that's a key part. Like when we have gone through a situation where we're having to have a serious talk with the customer, it's not about them. It's about the way they're using the software. That's not scalable for us. It's probably not ideal for them. And so trying to make sure that you're talking about it in a calm and rational way, that you're getting all of the various different stakeholders involved on both sides of the organization, like your executive sponsor on both sides needs to be involved. You need to make sure you've got your CS leadership, your sales leadership should be involved. All of these different people and all of the different relationships between the two sides of the organization need to be involved in talking about this. And it should never, ever be a situation where your customer is surprised that you're no longer going to be in a business relationship with them. It needs to be, you need to have had these conversations at all of these different levels numerous times to say, you know, here's what we're going to put in on our side, but you also need to be putting things in on from your side for this to work, or otherwise this situation just becomes untenable. So that sort of is one thing that I really love how Peter said that is you're not firing a customer, you're firing the scenario. And then the other thing that I would just say is everybody in your entire organization needs to be involved in sorting out the way to optimize customers being successful on your platform, whether it's, you know, marketing and how they're targeting product and what they're building, customer success, sales, all of these different people. It's an opportunity for you to make sure you're mapping the customer journey from end to end. And then also through all of those points, identifying the parts where things are potentially going wrong so that you can fix them, and then you're not having situations of whether it's firing a customer or hopefully you're just preventing churn generally.
Yeah, and like the point about it's a continuous conversation. It doesn't come up as a surprise. It's something that you have several conversations about it. I'm going to share a Slido right now. For those of you who have a couple of minutes, I know that we are a bit out of time, but if you want to stay to understand, for instance, question for Veronica, how would you calculate how much it costs to keep a customer that you should fire? The cost of keeping.
I can have a go at this because I think I've started this throw that comment during the conversation. Well, essentially start with CAC, cost of acquisition. That's already in. Then you would need to calculate resource from CS perspective and the dev perspective. So if you have one CSM, you would need to gauge how many hours a week they spend on that customer, and pretty much just go by their kind of a salary and take that ratio. You'll need to chat to your CTO or a dev lead to get kind of the same gauge on the resource spent on the technical side. And I would say that would be the best start. So you essentially look at what are you paying people, how much time they spend on it, get the cost, make sure that you incorporate cost of acquisition as well. That is kind of the formula, I'd say. The other way to think about it is think about the return on your investment. So for example, how long does it take you to recover CAC essentially? Is it 3 months, 6 months, 12 months? And you can look at it in terms of how many months we need to keep this customer to recoup that revenue. That will be a gauge as well. So if it's just 1 month, okay, that's one thing. If it's another 6 months, then you might question that the maths wouldn't work. That would be my approach. The two kind of scenarios that you can go.
Perfect. Peter, Kristin, anything you would like to add on this one?
I think you could. I agree entirely. I think that activity-based cost measurement. Now, I think one has to. I could give one quick word of advice. There is that yes, we should be able to pinpoint with accuracy the cost to serve per customer. I don't know of many CS functions that are doing that right now, because that could be pretty scary. But I do think we're heading that way, because it does make a lot of sense. I think there is another way to ask the question, which is that which is probably around what are the returns that we will get from keeping this customer, because our investors will look at the average lifetime value of a customer, right? So if our average lifetime value of a customer is 7 or 8 years, let's say, and you're proposing to get rid of somebody after 1 or 2 years, that could be a tough sell, right? However, if somebody could easily come back and say, actually, I've worked it out, that if we actually keep this customer for the next 8 years, it's an acceptable loss for the business, right? Or it's an acceptable cost, because we will make X amount from this customer. So it's I'm not giving a real answer here, but I guess it's just always remember, as I found out to my cost over the years, is that if you're going to look at something to prove your own case, then prove the opposite, right? Prove the opposite too, because you're coming at it just from your lens, as opposed to the CFO lens or the investor lens. That's just something I just wanted to share.
Good point. I will move to the question on sales, and then we'll finish with the how-to from Duncan. So a question of, is it for you, Kristin, because you mentioned, you talked about the relationship with sales and the collaboration there. So isn't it the responsibility of the sales team to qualify the customer and ensure they're a good fit, rather than the CS team's role to fire the customer? What do you think?
Yeah, 100% anonymous. The thing is that I think that we've all been in situations where that has unfortunately not happened. And I think my point is make sure, one, that sales feels it in their pocketbook, if I can be so blunt, in terms of them, if they bring on board a customer who is just, you know, an obvious poor fit for the organization. And then the other thing is that making sure, as I said, that you are mapping your customer journey from end to end. And I mean, even as a prospect and how they're going about choosing who they're using as a potential partner. So yes, I completely agree that sales should be determining whether the customer is an appropriate fit. But I think the reality is that they don't always do it.
Yes. Let's finish with the last one from Duncan, and then we'll wrap up, because that we are way out of time. Who wants to answer the last one? So any tips when you have to have this tough conversation, how to do this? Who wants to go?
I'll just throw out a few top tips. One, don't use the word fire. Second of all is if you have the opportunity to recommend a competitor to them, and that shows two things. One is that you're being mature about it, and say, look, I know that our competitor X has this particular workflow. I really think that you should go and work with them. Now that achieves two things. One, as I said, you come across as being mature. Second of all, you're passing the problem over to your competitor. And then finally, to thank them for their business and for their patience and everything else, because you just never know that somebody that was causing all the bad fit, if you like, leaves that company and somebody else comes in and they have a different view. So always be mature about it and always thank them for the business. And I think they'd be my top tips.
Great tips. Anything that you would like to add, Kat or Kristin, on this one?
No, I think that's a great wrap, really, from Peter. I think those are great tips. You know, be an adult, be respectful, do the right thing.
Good. Kristin, anything you'd like to add?
It should never be a surprise. You should have had numerous conversations over, you know, a period of months to ensure that the customer knows what the challenges are, you're aware of what the challenges are, and you're both working towards trying to solve it. It should never be a surprise.
Perfect. Thank you so much, everyone. I'm going to take a quick picture if you want to put your camera on, so that then I will be able, 1, 2, 3, smile. Perfect. And then, because we're going to continue this conversation in the CSN workplace community, if you're not a member yet, do join. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the breakfast, join us also for the customer conference on the 15th and 16th of June. Kristin, Peter, Kat, thank you so much for taking the time, for sharing your knowledge, for sharing those great tips. It was a fantastic conversation. And for everyone out there, please take care. Have a fantastic week, and seeing you in the community. Thank you so much for your time. Thanks, you.
Thanks, Alex.
Thank you, Alex.
Bye.
Thanks, guys.